All right. In this one, I'm planning on talking about the building of inherent tension into a world. And then I'm going to go through and create some of that inherent tension by creating a main religion used by the world, a radical subgroup of said religion, and a cult of that uses the same kind of general framework but twists what the actual messaging of the religion is. And so I'll get into those in just a second, but the reason why I like to build inherent tension into the world is because it causes there to allow for the meeting of conflict external from your main characters, which is inherently easier to write and get people more involved in. People understand a lot better, oh, this person is going to go fight a dragon, rather than the demons within ourselves are the things that we must face, kind of thing. And it doesn't necessarily need to be as esoteric as that, but there's very few stories that rely heavily on an internal conflict without also having an external conflict helping support that narrative. A good example of that would probably be the first 3 or 4 episodes of Frieren. It's a wonderful example of something that is very internal conflict heavy. And I wouldn't necessarily even call it internal conflict. It's mainly just character development, which usually happens from an internal conflict. But there is some struggle within that. That's a whole other thing, though. There's a benefit to having there being tension in the world, which is your character can then get wrapped up in that tension. And then that causes there to be a story, right? So if there's a tensionless story, then people tend to not engage with it, right? Versus a higher tension story, people will engage with it more, and there's limits to that naturally. But if you have a zero tension story, people tend not to engage, because then you're either talking about something that was a foregone conclusion that there wasn't even. It's like, cool, the guy walked off the cliff and hit the ground and died. Right? It's like, okay, cool. So he walked off the cliff, hit the ground, and died. Where in that was I supposed to engage, you know? And some people will engage with that, but you can make the story more interesting by saying he had a grappling hook. So he had a grappling hook and someone pushed him. So he was at the edge of a cliff, someone pushed him off. He tosses the grappling hook to try to save him. The grappling hook goes up and up and up and up, and it goes right to the point where it's about to clip onto the edge of the cliff, and the person kicks it so it doesn't actually make it all the way, and then he hits the ground and dies. And so that's a more engaging story than just the he falls off and dies. And the tension came from the how do I describe this? The tension came from the not knowing of the end result or not knowing how we get there. So it's the suspension of disbelief is one of the pieces, right? So it's the engagement and the draw into the world. So when your audience starts to get sucked into the story that you're telling, then anything that has tension has more tension than if someone wasn't really engaging with the piece. The other portion of it is you have some sort of mechanism where the main character can fight back somehow, right? So if you just have a guy who's getting beat up all the time without any way to try to fight back, then it's not a very engaging story. But if you have someone who has the potential to fight back, then you can create some interest there, like let's say he has the potential to fight back but doesn't, then why isn't he fighting back? He has the potential to fight back and he does. Do you punish him for it? Stuff like that, right? But having a back and forth between the main character and the thing that's causing conflict is basically the core of what a story is. It's a back and forth between the I don't necessarily want to say it'd be a back and forth between the protagonist and the antagonist. I think that's a decent way to put it. So when you set up a world that has inherent tension, it's primed for there to be an antagonist. And if there's an antagonist who's affecting things outside of just the main character, then the main character starts to get invested into it outside of just themselves, which then allows for the audience to get invested into it outside of just the main character. And that increases the engagement beyond just, okay, I got character A and character B and they're fighting. It'd be, I have character A and then there's character B, and character A is trying to actually protect character C from character B, right? So the protagonist is trying to defend the bystander from the antagonist. And that creates the more you start to deal with these bonds that tie things together, the more people can start to find themselves getting engaged. There is some knack and trick to it, but that's the general setup. If you have too many of those, or you throw someone into it too fast, then it's like hitting a wall rather than getting entangled into a net. You want to leave a few threads out, and they'll start to play around with them, and you'll start to add more threads to the pile as they start to tangle themselves into the story. If you get the analogy. Anyway, so that's why I am building inherent tension into the world, is so that it's primed for the main character to start getting into types of conflict, rather than needing to then build the character so that it has some sort of conflict with the world itself. If the world's in conflict, the main character doesn't necessarily need to be in conflict with it to become in conflict with something, because it already has the conflict there. But if there's no conflict, then you'll actually need the main character to start conflicting with aspects of the world that it's running into. So that gives you a little bit of a background idea. Anyway, on to the religion of the Schmeckendorf flower. Yes, I chose that name purely for how fun it is. Or pretty much, yeah. So I was thinking of doing 3 religious groups. The first one would be the Petals of Light, which is the main accepted religion throughout, the world. General tenets, I'm a little iffy on those, but the idea would be, let's build up a general idea for okay, why does this religion exist? It exists so that because there's a belief that when you die, you can return to the flower. Okay, so when you die, you can return to the flower. How do you return to the flower? It would be, there's 2 actual hows. It would be does that show physically how, and then what actions do you have to take for that? And does that show physically how? I would say that let's put some annual meteor shower, right? And in that annual meteor shower, because the people believe that the stars are actually the pollen from the flower, right? And who knows, they could be whatever, because of the way that we set the world building up. But the stars are the pollen from the flower, because the flower is the source of light, and they speckle the sky. When this meteor shower happens, it is the souls of the world transmuting into stars to return to the flower. Okay, great. So we have that, which means that there's religious ceremonies and whatnot during this annual meteor shower. Good to know. And then how would one become a star? Because if everyone could become a star, no matter what they did, then there would be... If everyone could return to the flower, no matter what they did, then you wouldn't have the need for a system to tell you what to do. Great. So as long as you don't corrupt yourself via darkness, you can return to the flower. Because their stance is that the flower originally separated off when darkness came from the roots up the stem to try to choke out the light. And so the flower had to separate itself from the stem, which in the analogy, the stem is the world. So the flower separated itself from the world and has a way in which the people can return to the flower, which is through not getting corrupted by the thing that pushed the flower away, which would be the darkness. Great. So that's the idea behind that general thing. And I was thinking that the tenets behind it would be something along the lines of flower-based, right? So they would have, their religious symbol would be a flower or a flower petal. Their sacred rituals would be done in a field of flowers. They would try to base their tenets off of ways in which they observed flowers, right? So it'd be maybe something along the lines of, it's bad to be lazy because even the flowers get up during the morning, right? So people who tend to sleep in are more likely to be corrupt via darkness. So things that make you tend to sleep in would be bad, such as staying up late partying, hangovers, XYZ, right? If you guys have any ideas for tenets similar to that kind of thing that could be fun to throw in, let me know in the comments. All the things, all the stuff. The radical subgroup from that is the Thorns of Light. So they have a slightly different view on the idea, which is, if they can eradicate all of the darkness from the world, the flower would reunite with them. So their whole goal is to eradicate all of the darkness from the world. So they're going to be the main righteous antagonist if our hero tends to bump up against that sort of thing. So if our hero tends to bump up against things where they struggle with, in this example, sleeping in, then that would put the Thorns of Light in the antagonistic position, because they would try to stop that, because if they can stop that all across the place, then the world would reunite with the flower once more. Okay, great. So that gives you a general idea. Again, a lot of their pieces will be based off of the tenets of the petal, so that has to get worked out eventually, but I wanted to leave it a little bit more open-ended in case anybody had any ideas. The last piece is the Cult of the Roots. So the Cult of the Roots believed that the flower actually died off, And so when it died off, it wilted and disconnected from the stem. So you're actually in a world that is dying and is in dire need to be saved. The general idea behind this one is that there was not enough darkness in the world to sustain the flower, because they believe that because the roots were in the darkness, the flower must have sustained itself off of darkness to produce its light. And so their goal is to try to create a new flower by making as much darkness as possible. Again, the term for what the darkness would be would fall along the lines of what the tenets of the flower of the petals of light are. So they are an antagonistic by nature piece to the rest of the religion. But I don't necessarily think that the main religion is combative, which is why I introduced the thorns. So you can have a majority of people who aren't necessarily combative, and then you'll have a small amount of people who are combative against this other small amount of people, and those two can clash while the rest of the people will, try to follow the tenets of the petal. And so by nature, you have a setup of people who don't fall into the category of wanting to follow the tenets of the petal will be more inclined to joining the cult of the roots. Anyway, that's the general setup of all of the different pieces. I don't think we necessarily need a separate antagonistic piece for this to work, especially if we set it up correctly where the petals, the petals of light were against such things like crime, and then most crime syndicates would actually be in alignment with the cult of the roots. And you can have a religious people who aren't actually in the religious area who are being influenced by the cult of the roots so that they can bring about more darkness, not necessarily for the purpose of bringing more darkness, but that's just because it's a byproduct of whatever the heck they're doing. That aside, the last piece I wanted to add in was maybe some sort of cyclical life-death thematic piece to the religious aspects, but I wasn't sure where to shoehorn that in yet, so I haven't done anything big to that. The last thing I want to address is more meta than necessarily the things we've been talking about. So it's more about this particular series in general, which is it seems to not actually be getting almost any engagement, which is totally fine. But one of the main reasons I jumped into this was to be used as a distraction from actually facing some of the problems that I'm facing, which is not singing as one of the things. I've been drawing, I've been doing all the stuff. I could potentially talk about some D&D worlds and whatnot, but I think this falls in alignment with said thing there. But there has been one particular thing that I've been avoiding on this channel, which would be singing, because I'm terrified of the idea of someone who knows more than me coming in here and being like, yeah, dude, you're just bad at singing. Because it's something that I would like to be good at and have a little bit of confidence in, and also know that I could absolutely just be fooling myself. So I probably have to bite the bullet on that one in the next 1 to 2 episodes. That also means that this series, if it starts to get more engagement, I'll probably pick it up more, because if people are interested, I'll put a bit more work into it. But it means that this series in particular might get backburnered for a bit until I get some sort of stroke of inspiration to continue the process of doing it. And I'll probably work on it here and there and whatnot, but it's not going to be like what it's been the past few times, which is just release after release after release after release. So, yeah,